Dietrich's studio operated in Bishop, California from 1917 to 1930, offering photographic services to the town and travelers and selling picture postcards of the Eastern Sierra and Yosemite. The business was owned and operated by W. E. Detrick, and this is his story. I'm Tom Bopp. About the first time I heard about W. E. Detrick was when I met his granddaughter, Diane Detrick. I knew Diane's work as an artist before I met her. She'd had a one-woman show of her watercolors at the Visitor Center in Yosemite National Park, and I admired her photorealistic images of rock climbers and such. We met at the Wawona Hotel in Yosemite where I work, and we got married in 1994. First, I'll show you Diane's relationship to W. E. Detrick. Here's his wife, Nettie Detrick, with her grandchildren by her son, Dean. From left to right, that's Dean Jr., Diane, Mark, and John. There was only one other grandchild, Phyllis, by Nettie's daughter, Ursula. Stepping back in time, there's Nettie seated on the left, with her husband, W. E. Detrick, seated on the right. In the middle are three grandkids, John in front, then Dean Jr., and Phyllis behind them. Standing in back are all four of Nettie and Will Detrick's kids. From left to right, that's Lawrence and Janetta, Ursula, and the tall one is Dean Sr. next to his wife, Mabel. Here's Nettie and Will in Alhambra in 1948, and then back around the turn of the century, and in Iowa for their wedding in 1897. Through his career as a professional photographer, Detrick would track, more or less, his family history in pictures, including some places familiar to visitors to Yosemite and the eastern Sierra Nevada. As a self-made, self-employed small business owner, Detrick supported his family through a variety of setbacks and sent 3 of his kids to college. William Edward Detrick was born March 2, 1872, on a farm in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, now about 2 hours west of New York City. He was maybe the 5th or 6th of 7 siblings. When Will was 21, in 1893, both his parents contracted typhoid fever and died within 17 days of each other. This may have been what prompted Will to leave the farm and venture out into the world. According to a 1933 biographical sketch about Detrick, his early environment was that of a typical farm, which meant long hours and no small amount of real work. It was only natural that as a boy he should look about for some profession which would give him lighter work, shorter hours, and an opportunity for self-expression. Photography seemed to give him what he wanted. A nationally advertised school caught Will's attention, and sometime in the mid-1890s he headed off to the Illinois College of Photography. By 1904, tuition and lab fees for the 8-month session were $200, that's almost $6,000 today, with the promise that as a professional photographer, one could earn as much as $50 a week, about $700 today. It was a vocational school and focused on practical training. After graduating, Detrick headed to Iowa, possibly following a lead from the college for an employment opportunity. By 1896, he'd established a studio in Pilot Mound, Iowa, then moved to the nearby town of Manson, and finally settled in Holstein, Iowa. On New Year's Eve, 1897, he married Nettie Seaver. 12 years and 3 children later, in 1909, Detrick participated in a nationally advertised land auction in southern Oregon, land recently freed up after years of fraud and litigation. Many of the parcels were purchased sight unseen. That year, the Dietrich family packed up and moved to Lakeview, Oregon, where Dietrich listed his occupation as farmer. The Dietrichs, accompanied by their fellow auction winners, struggled to farm a semi-arid region beset by jackrabbits that would ravage the crops. Dietrich left hardly any photographs from this period, but we do have his image of a rabbit drive. These brutal events were necessary to the struggling farmers, not only to save their crops, but to save themselves from starvation. Rabbit drives would become common during the Dust Bowl. Rabbits herded into pens, clubbed to death, then prepared into meals. After 2 long years of this hard living, the Dietrichs had had it with Oregon. A travel article describes the area as it looks today. You can still see the abandoned shells of sodbusters' cabins from the turn of the 20th century. These shells are the skeletal remains of settlers' dreams, homes of folks who fell for the land swindlers' claims that rain follows the plow, that once a fellow had gouged up the land and sprinkled some wheat grains on it, the skies would open up and the 20 or so inches of rain a year needed for dry land farming would suddenly appear. This worked about as well as you might expect it would. Today you'll see very few farms in the high desert country, and those you'll see are irrigated. Family tradition has it that Dietrich sold the farm in exchange for a car, which in 1911 they drove south to Long Beach in Southern California, where he reestablished Dietrich's studio at 115 West 1st Street and their residence here at 126 East 1st Street, which was just upstairs of the local newspaper offices of The Press, which later became the Long Beach Press-Telegram. City life evidently did not suit the Dietrichs. Living upstairs of a city newspaper was no picnic, with the noise and especially noxious fumes from the printing presses, which so affected Nettie's health that she lost most of her hair. They almost bought a house on 10 acres at the top of Signal Hill, but the dismal road blew out his tires so regularly that Will couldn't imagine driving the kids to school on it. Too bad. 10 years later, the discovery of rich oil reserves on Signal Hill made owners of the property fabulously wealthy. Nettie is listed as running her own business out of their home, which she called the Lenore, but we have no idea what she sold. Maybe her paintings or dresses. They did manage to enjoy some time at the beach. Here's Nettie and friends at the Long Beach Pier shortly before the pier famously collapsed in 1913, killing 38 people. After just 2 years in Long Beach and 8 months after the birth of their son Dean, the Dietrich family once again pulled up stakes and moved to Oxnard, California in October of 1913. In December, the Oxnard Daily Courier reported, "The Dietrich studio is located on South 5th Street, just across from the plaza on the ground floor. Is thoroughly fitted up and arranged for classic work. His photographic equipment cannot be excelled, and he is prepared to do both studio and outdoor work, many of the attractive pictures in the studio being made personally by Mr. Dietrich." After only 3 years in Oxnard, on December 29, 1916, the Courier announced, "Dietrich is packing the studio furnishings preparatory to moving to Bishop, California." On January 5, 1917, the Courier reported, "Mr. Dietrich says that he did well here and is leaving only because he has an opportunity to locate in a broader field." Now in his mid-40s, Dietrich traveled alone to Bishop to start the next iteration of Dietrich's studio, leaving his family in Oxnard until his children reached the end of the school year. In the middle of June 1917, he returned to Oxnard to pick up his family, where they loaded up the Detroiter motor car and embarked on a hot, dusty trip to their new home. Dean, who was 4 at the time, remembered the washboard roads and sleeping on the desert floor at night. His sister Ursula recalled that fellow travelers were astonished at their behavior and warned the Dietrichs about the prospect of waking up with a rattlesnake for a sleeping companion. Next up, we have 18 minutes of video from my interview with W.E. Dietrich's son, Dean Dietrich Sr., recorded on November 17, 2003, including excerpts from his trip to Bishop in September of 2001.
Now, I have a picture here, a snow picture of West Line Street.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the Dietrich Home to the far left. Keep going.
Keep going.
There it is, Dad.
Where?
Right there, on the right.
Yeah, right here it is my house.
That's your house?
That's my house. Why, we got to get in there and see who lives there. Isn't that something?
Wow. Okay, so this is the house that you moved into.
Yes, right here.
And your dad bought it half finished?
Half finished. On the inside, it wasn't finished. My room was upstairs in the front portion where the roof come down right down here, and I could reach in my bed up and touch the shingles. Now this is a very early picture because there are no trees in here. The orchard I showed was here. This end of the house is the south end. And see this window? That was the window to my room.
Oh, so
and my bed was over back here, and that's where I could reach the roof.
Oh.
Now these are trees that we planted. This is many years later.
What room is what here?
Dad's bedroom was
That's
right
my
there.
bedroom window.
That's your bedroom window?
The building that your dad
Was
bought,
right here.
was it like a Victorian style building?
No, it was just a old wooden
And this was where the first studio was, and
first
it
studio?
belonged to who?
Forbes
It was Forbes Studio.
F-O-R-B-E.
And your dad bought it probably
Bought
in
it out.
17.
Yeah, I
when he moved
suppose.
here, yeah.
And see that white building down there?
Yeah, I was looking at that.
That's the First National Bank. The only bank in town for years and years and years. Dad sold more of this picture of the donkey with the beer bottles out of than any card that he had on the shelf.
Did he take that picture?
He took, no, this was before Dad's time.
Oh, how funny. So when he bought the studio, he bought the rights to that picture.
Oh, yes. Well, they didn't have rights in those days.
Well, he
They
just owned the picture.
Yeah, he owned the picture.
Really?
And when we went out to take the graduation classes and pictures for the high school for a flash,
Yeah.
for a whole group, he had a V-shaped tin with a long handle on it. And he would put cotton in the bottom of it.
Yeah.
Then he would sprinkle flash powder in this V-shaped over the cotton. He'd get everything ready, and then I'd run over and light it and get away.
And get the heck out of
While
there.
he was behind the camera in the back. And he would take pictures of big groups.
So he wasn't just doing scenic photography.
He was doing photography for his money came at Christmas time, where the couples and people came in to have their family photos taken.
Ah,
And he took all the pictures of all the senior class individually
oh, for the yearbook.
for the yearbook.
Now, did he have a window display or anything to
Yes,
attract
he had a
you
window
in?
display, and he would have to redecorate it, or Mom would redecorate it.
And what do you see as you're walking in
As
the
you
front
open
door?
the door, there was a bell rang.
Mm-hmm.
And that bell rang to let Dad know when he was there alone, somebody came in the front. He's back there working chemicals, and they'd have to wait a little bit. But they got used to it, and they would know that Dad would be coming shortly. And he was right next to a music store. And Dad and this other gentleman, who was the music instructor in the high school, he was an older man. The stores were right together. One door you will go into my dad's studio, the other door went into the music store. Craig was his last name, Fred Craig. Craig, and he was a jolly fellow, bachelor. You had rolls of film,
Yeah.
rolled up in little rolls, and he would open them up in the dark room and take the negatives out and develop them by putting them in these big tanks, you know, for a certain length of time. And my job every Saturday was to, down underneath, he had a big bin, sort of a bin, and he would just throw the empty spool and everything together, was take gunny sacks and go down and pick those. I was down in the dark and around a lot of the chemicals. I hated it. And pick hands full, put them in gunny sacks and take them out the back door to be burned. Of course, he sold. In his studio, he had films for sale. He had cameras for sale.
Oh.
He sold cameras, too. Anybody brought in a roll of films, they'll develop them. He had a great big flat trimmer with a knife this long, and he'd line them up and line them off so they look nice for folks, and cut them, and then that was the last thing we did. Then he put the price on it for the developing and everything, and put it on alphabetically in folders that he had, Dietrich Studio. My mother would come down most of the day and help out. You know, she did tinting.
Oh, she would hand tint the
Hand tint
to
the
color, make them
portraits.
color.
The portraits, the face
Yeah.
of a person. She would rub it in with oil and if they wanted it tinted, they like that one fish picture I have in there. That's what she did.
Oh, no, okay. Well, wait a minute. Let's find the. I saw that earlier in here.
Anything you was
I think I saw
Say.
it. Yeah, here. Okay. Now you see the tinting on this.
Yes.
Now, how would she do it? Was she using brushes, or would she use her fingers?
She was
or
no,
what?
she used cotton in her fingers and rubbed. It was sort of an oil, and rub it, and then smooth it out to what to the
with her fingers and
with her
the
fingers
color.
most of the time.
What kind of containers were the colors in? Were they in little?
They were an oil,
They were in oil.
colored, well, like a toothpaste, like toothpaste. She'd put out a little on her finger, and the color she wanted.
Okay, like I
Yeah.
know what you mean, like toothpaste.
But she always had big cottons that she could put her finger around it, so that and change it all the time.
Okay, now you're in the store,
Oh yeah.
and you're just inside the door, and the door just let.
as
Now,
you
what do you
come
see?
in, the complete side was just filled with postcards
On the wall?
on the wall, and you'd go down and you'd see one section. One section was Mammoth Lakes, one section was Bishop Creek, and on, so that the tourists came in. That was the first thing they were a nickel apiece. The other side of the wall was the portraits of people, framed. Dad made frames.
He made frames.
He made frames
Wow.
and framed his portraits. There was skylight that came in, so it was not too big at the front, but it went that back a long ways
Oh,
for the display. Then it went into the dark room.
okay.
And the dark room was, a pretty big place, but it was fairly narrow. And it seems to me we stepped down a step, like you're getting in a hole, you know. And that was the dark room where Dad did the printing. The other side of the room was the manual making of frames.
Oh, so it was set up big table or
Great big benches, and he had special vices.
yeah,
So he put the frames together, and then the little nails he would,
to attach
and then
them.
he had to cut glass. Had to
And
cut-
he did all that.
he did all of this.
Huh.
Amazing. wasn't it?
Yeah, he's a busy guy.
Oh, Dad worked a lot, worked hard.
What do you think? How do you think it'd react finding out that some of his postcards are going for one just sold for $130?
Well, that's a hard question. He would probably say, how stupid it is for him to pay that kind of money for nothing. He wouldn't take any credit.
Did he think of himself, I don't know, did he think of any of his work that he was doing art?
No,
no?
not at all.
It was
money. I mean, it was, oh, well, he was putting Lawrence through college,
mm-hmm.
and that cost a lot of money. But he spent all his summers up in the mountains on a survey gang.
Now, Lawrence did some of the photographs, right, that your dad sold?
Oh, lots of them. Lots of them. He carried a camera on him all the time while he was surveying. He would get paintings or postcard views that nobody else ever got because he was going way back in the... And, of course, he helped Dad out a lot that way.
And so you don't know when you're looking at a Dietrich Studio postcard whether it was taken by your dad or by your brother.
Yeah, that way it would just say Dietrich Studio.
Mm-hmm. So some of them, what do you think? The high country ones would...
Most of them be all taken by him.
Did your father ever go up into the high country?
No, never did. Other than on Sundays, once in a while, we'd take a trip, an auto trip up to Mammoth.
Now, when your dad would go out to take scenic photographs, do you remember?
He very rarely did.
Rarely did.
Very rarely. He was too busy in that studio.
So Lawrence took most of those.
Well, Lawrence took a lot of them. They built an aqueduct, a cement aqueduct, right up the whole valley to the end. Then they staggered electric pumps, one here, one here, one here, and here, all the way up the valley. And they got to a point where all they had to do was push a button, and these pumps would all start going. And it was like a vacuum. They sucked all the water out, and everything died.
Now, do you remember, did that affect your fruit trees that you had, your dad's?
Sure.
Really? So did they start to die, or what happened?
They just died.
All those fruit trees?
Well, they were being watered by this underground water. You take water away from anything, what happens? It dries up, gets hard, and dies. And they fought what they could, but they couldn't fight Los Angeles. On several occasions, the people got so angry that at nighttime they went down, and there were gates where, for safety, where the aqueduct was going along a canyon, that the river was right below them. But the river didn't have much water in it because all the water was going in, funneled into here. Well, if they wanted to stop the water in the aqueduct, or there was a slide or something, they would have to stop that water. So they would open the gates and it would go down the old river until they finished. So the people took dynamite and went down and blew up the aqueduct, and it let it pour back into the river. And our schools were so bitter and upset in the whole thing of what people were left up there. They would take the kids down. And I remember very well getting in the bus. We're going down to see where the aqueduct was blown up. And they would show it to the kids for history.
As a
Let
field.
them know just what Los Angeles did.
Wow.
I mean, this was the... So businesses just drained out, and Dad sold out to get out from away from there. And he went up to Ukiah.
Okay. Now, he sold it to a fellow named...
Curtis Phillips.
So your dad
And I'm quite sure Dad let it go for a song. It was plumb off the tree. They buy a studio with all these photographs of things that Dad had. Negatives and negatives. So he just moved in.
Any idea how long he stayed in business?
Not too long. Not too long.
Dietrich's studio was probably sold in 1930, but for sure by 1932. Contrary to Dean Dietrich's recollection, Curtis Phillips was successful, and his business continues to operate as Phillips Camera House, just a few doors north of the building once occupied by Dietrich's. In 1930, leaving their son Dean to live alone at home and finish high school, Will and Nettie headed off on a tour of California looking for a new place to call home. They chose Ukiah, establishing a photo studio there in 1930 at 106 West Church Street. This would be the last of Dietrich's studios, which he operated for 15 years in Ukiah. They built this home that still stands at the corner of Dora and Clay Streets. On August 1st, 1945, they packed up one last time and moved to Alhambra, Southern California, to be close to their daughters Ursula and Janetta, as well as their son Lawrence, who lived in Beverly Hills, and their son Dean, who would settle with his family in Pacific Palisades. W.E. Dietrich died at the age of 80 on October 8, 1952. Nettie lived another 21 years and died in Alhambra on September 18, 1973. Lawrence Dietrich, who took many of the photographs for Dietrich's studio postcards, died in 1981, and Dean Dietrich Sr. died in 2004. We'll give him the last word.
And we are talking about William Dietrich,
William Edward Dietrich.
your dad.
W.E. Dietrich is what he went by. W.E. Dietrich is what he went by. And then the W.E. Dietrich Studios.
Okay. And you would know because you're his son.
I sure do. I remember the hours and hours. I figured my dad could do anything out of the way, you know.
Yeah.
Good. He was a good dad. I never heard him ever even so much as swear or cuss. Never heard him. And of course, he never drank. He never smoked.
His hands had chemical.
Oh yeah, it turned all his fingernails brown. They were dark brown from the chemicals that he used. He'd take his little fingers and he would take each little print and shake it like that. And he could do it just like that, throw it in the fresh water.
Do you have any parting remembrances of your dad you want to get in?
Well, I couldn't have had a better dad. And he was honest and fair to the last penny with everyone. He worked. He was a workaholic. He worked too much. Well, I shouldn't say that. He was just a hard worker all the time and known as a hard worker. And my mother, bless her heart, worked right along by his side, so they both worked together. Everything was together, and so that's how they got along. What else more can I say?
That was perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't do much. You got all that on film?
I got it all on tape.
Oh, you rascal. You rascal, you. Well, it's a pleasure to give it to you.